powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Now, live from inside the Matt Black Kia Studios, this is Football at 4.
Football at 4 is powered by the Inside the Birds podcast, InsideTheBirds.com. Geoff Mosher will be here today to talk a little NFL draft and get his thoughts as we are coming down the wire. This will be his last chance to kind of pontificate on what he thinks will happen. Tomorrow, pick 7, pick, I don't know that there's a trade. There could be. Pick 10 and pick 30. And, of course, you can listen at 7 o'clock right here on 97.3 ESPN. Every pick of the draft exclusively on 97.3 ESPN as the Eagles own 2 picks. There's a lot of buzz right now about a possible trade up. So I see Geoff Mosher, and we bring him in now to the Sports Bash Live on 97.3 ESPN. Let's start with that, Geoff. We were talking right before you came on. I don't know if you saw this tweet from Tony Pauline, which is getting a little bit of talk. He's a Pro Football Network, which is where you can check out Adam Kaplan's mock draft. He does a mock draft there. Tony says the Eagles are setting up the groundwork for a potential move up from the 10 pick if they could get one of the pass rushers. Now, that's the wording that I think is interesting. One of the pass rushers. I think most people assume Jalen Carter's the guy they want. He's making it as if, hey, if some of these guys get by 2, if Arizona goes offensive lineman and another defensive lineman drops, multiple defensive linemen. So, Geoff Mosher, how would you read that, and would that make sense to you?
Well, it would make sense. In fact, the podcast that you'll hear tomorrow morning with myself and Adam Kaplan, as we really, tie up the loose ends headed into the draft, is that we discussed the way Howie has talked about next year having 12 picks has made at least me feel that I think some people would say that he is not in a position to be aggressive because he only has 6 picks and he has no picks in the 4th, 5th rounds, right? So
as of now,
I think people would say, man, you're trying to add, not reduce. But the Super Bowl window here is pretty open, right? It's a very good team. And if there's an aggressive move that enables you to add some pretty good talent, whether it's a pass rusher or maybe even a player from another NFL team using a different pick, whatever, I don't think Howie will be afraid to be aggressive because he knows that next year, right, when you're now a little bit, you've got another year on Brandon Graham, another year on Fletcher Cox, another year on Jason Kelce, sort of these guys, maybe 2 of these 3, if not all 3, are not back. That's when you really start to need to turn the roster over, and they're going to have a boatload of draft picks to be able to do that. Plus, he can borrow from the future as well if someone's willing to take a future, high pick to be able to make a move in this year's draft. So when I see a report that he'd move up for a pass rusher, be interesting to see which player that is. I would surmise Lucas Van Ness is a guy that they would really love to have just because of his positional versatility. He's played inside, he's played outside. He can stand up. I mean, he can really do everything that an Eagles pass rusher has been able to do. And of course, if Jalen Carter slips and they're comfortable with the character, that's the one thing I'd put, because the Eagles with their first round picks for quite a while now have really emphasized character. So that one to me is a little, it's interesting because I think the report like a couple days ago was move up for Jalen Carter, and now it seems like move up for pass rusher. So, I think Van Ness is a guy that really fits what they do.
Well, interestingly enough, Jalen Carter was asked today, point blank, if you're there at 10, will the Eagles take you? Are you confident in that? His response, quote, "Yes, sir, I believe that." Maybe he has information that we don't have. That was, by the way, was from Eric Edholm, who tweeted that out.
It'd be pretty interesting if teams told prospects, "We will take you," when you don't have a top 2 or 3 pick and you have no idea if a guy is going to be there or not. Yeah. Plus, interesting that a team would tell a prospect that, knowing that the prospect could say that to the media. So maybe they wanted him to say that. Who knows?
A little reverse psychology there, right? Yeah, I mean, let me get your opinion. You say Lucas Van Ness, and it seems like Eagles fans, for whatever that means, are not all that excited about that pick. Do you have a thought why they would not be excited if they took Van Ness, and maybe why they should be excited if he was the guy.
They're probably not excited because he's not from the SEC. Not like All-American. At least I don't know if he was an All-American or not. He's not Nolan Smith. He's not Miles Murphy from Clemson. He's from Iowa. He wasn't a starter there, which was not because of talent. That was just because of the way Iowa rolls with guys who are underclassmen. John Robinson and some of those guys from the SEC that I just mentioned. I think that's why.
Yeah. Lucas Van Ness is Iowa, by the way, Big Ten player. Some people, and I think one of the things, too, as you mentioned, he's a guy who didn't have all the accolades because he wasn't a starting player. But he didn't start not because he wasn't good enough, mainly because that's the way Iowa does things. They just, they had seniors. They play ahead of them in terms of they get to be the starters. Right. Van Ness was a reserve player who played starting snaps. That spot at number 10, so much of that is based on what happens in front. And I guess in front of them, that number 2 spot, really, Moshe, do you think that really holds the key to what could happen in the top 10 there, what Houston does? It seems that no one can get a beat on what they want to do.
I think that's very fair. No one can get a beat on what they want to do. I mean, they shocked everybody last year, right, when they took Derek Stingley instead of taking Sauce Gardner, when every single personnel person and their mother would have told you that Sauce Gardner was going to be the most legit corner to come out in a really, really long time. And not that Derek Stingley wasn't good. It's just, it was sort of a surprise. So they're certainly a wild card. Maybe they want you to think they're a wild card and they're going to take CJ Stroud. I don't know. Maybe their thought process is we can get a pass rusher there like Will Anderson or Tyree Wilson or Jalen, whatever, and then still they pick 12th, right? Still be able to move up.
Well, that's the thing, Moshe.
Get a quarterback.
That's the thing. It's like if they don't love one of the quarterbacks, it almost seems like let's get a player that we really like. And then when 12 comes up, there'll be a quarterback that, okay, we take him, but we didn't put that much capital into. Even though 12's high, it's not 2.
Yeah, I mean, there's 2 schools of thought on that. So for quarterbacks, some will tell you, if you think a quarterback is good enough to take 12, then you take him 2 because you think he's pretty good to take 12. That's still upper first round, and that means you think he's good, and you don't want to mess around and lose out on him. Clearly the Giants felt that way about Daniel Jones, right? And they picked him really high. So there's that school of thought, but then there's the other, because I think they have a bunch of picks, right, this year and next year from moves they made, where they could theoretically say, fine, well, we will take our best player on our board, who's a position player, not quarterback, at 2. And then if we need to move up 1 or 2 spots to get like CJ Stroud or Anthony Rich or whatever, or we think all 3 of them are really good and we'll have the pick of whichever one at 12 because we know the 8 teams above us aren't taking quarterbacks, then they're just playing it smart.
Geoff Mosher, Inside the Birds podcast, and make sure you check that out with their final look. Their mock draft, is up right now at InsideTheBirds.com, where Adam, Andrew, and Jeff each took a pick. Adam went with Bryce Young, number 1. Andrew took Will Anderson, number 2. So he also thinks and believes that the Texans will take a defensive player. You think that Arizona will take Tyree Wilson. It seems that there's a lot of buzz that they might be looking at an offensive lineman in this spot after not protecting their quarterback for so many years, that there's some people that think they could push in that direction. And if that happens, if they take an offensive lineman, if you want a defensive player in your Philadelphia, that helps them out.
Yeah. I mean, I think the Arizona Cardinals are probably annoyed that the Houston Texans might not take a quarterback number 2.
Right.
Because I think that they would love for there only to be 2 quarterbacks left by the 3rd overall pick when they pick, so that teams get anxious and start calling them. Because I agree with you. I think they would really like to be able to add to the offensive line, but I'm going to guess that they don't have an offensive lineman graded high enough to be picked third overall. It's just not that strong. None of these offensive linemen are considered like can't miss, 10-time Pro Bowl, tackles. And the best one of them all, Skronsky, is probably a guard, right? So, which is not bad. It's just that some people think you don't take a guard top 10, whatever. Mm-hmm. So I think the Cardinals would be upset with the Texans if they didn't take a quarterback, because I think they would love to move down.
Yeah, definitely. The Texans thing is interesting because if they take a defensive player, that kind of hurts. But if they took a quarterback, that defensive player may go to Arizona. But if Arizona, let's say Houston, this is where it gets interesting about the whole making the move to try to move up. If Houston took a quarterback and Arizona took an offensive lineman, that's two defensive linemen that could have gone 2 and 3 that are now available at 4, 5, and then you throw in the Jalen Carters, and now you might have 4 or 5 guys at 4, 5, 6, 7, and then that is where the formula becomes, we got to move up to get one of these guys.
Correct. That very well. Or the idea that teams that want a quarterback trade up into the 3, 4, 5, and then sort of push some guys down. Well, I guess that wouldn't necessitate a trade up, right? Because teams trade up for that pushes the defensive lineman down. You're right. If there's a big run on D lineman pretty early, then that might force the Eagles' hand a little bit.
Yeah. All right. Well, that I guess, Moshe, is best case scenario is that a quarterback goes 2 and an offensive lineman goes 3. If you really want a defensive player, is what I'm saying.
Yeah. Or, sure. Just anything that would push a defensive or an offensive lineman down. Yeah. I mean, best case scenario is all these teams like Arizona and like Atlanta and other teams are like, oh, they fall in love with cornerbacks, right? And they start taking those guys.
Yeah. Well, that would be too. And, there's some, Atlanta in the past, for instance, they took Kyle Pitts, number 4. Could they be the one that goes out and takes Bijan Robinson at number 8? You know
what? They could be. At one time, I thought it would make a lot of sense. Now I don't think it makes a lot of sense. I hope they're smart because if you're going to take Bijan Robinson in the top 10, you should be more like the Eagles, right? Who can really maximize the best year of his career. The Falcons don't have a quarterback. They have no pass rushers on the outside, good interior ones, but not on the outside.
Mm-hmm.
What are you going to do? You're going to get Bijan Robinson and run the ball and score some points, but not enough. And you're going to have Spencer out there, not as protected, or at least not a defense that can't keep being games. It just, I don't know. I just don't think that. I don't want to make it seem as the same as the Giants when they took Saquon Barkley when they didn't have enough to compete with him. But it does sort of feel like that wouldn't be the best for the Falcons team interest to take a running back there.
Going through the rest of this mock draft up to the spot, you took Lucas Van Ness at number 9 for the Bears, which means Adam was on the clock for Philadelphia, and he took Peter Skronsky, which is interesting because the next pick was Broderick Jones, a tackle, and Paris Johnson, a tackle, went at 13. So he seems to think Skronsky would be their favorite. If they went offensive line and 3 of them were available, do you agree that Skronsky would be their pick?
And with Paris Johnson available or not available?
All 3. Paris Johnson, Skronsky, Broderick Jones. They're all there at 10. Do you think that Philly would favor Skronsky over the other 2?
I got a little last-minute homework that I'm going to have to do on that, Mike, because, I can just tell you that Skronsky has less question marks as far as what he is. If he's a guard, and I've heard, like a Zach Martin-like guard, very technically sound. Well, you put him at guard, you're going to love his guard play for the next 5 to 10, or not 5 to 7 to 12 years, right? Paris Johnson played guard first, then moved to tackle. More issues as far as, does his footwork match his punch? He could be a little slow-footed sometimes, sinking the hips, things like that. So there are more question marks about him, but he does have the ability to play tackle and guard, and the Eagles have Jeff Stoutland, who's been known to coach guys up and be able to, figure out their flaws and make them better. So, we went with Skronsky there because you just plug and play right guard, and the Eagles have a clear right guard need, but it wouldn't shock me at all if they took Paris Johnson and started him at right guard.
See, I actually seem to think that Paris Johnson is almost, regardless of who's on the board, if he's there at 10, I'm starting to lean more towards the Eagles would go that direction, and that's even if Skronsky's there. And my reasoning is this. Skronsky seems, and we talked a little bit about this last week, but seems to only project to be a guard. Paris Johnson played right guard in college. They moved him to left tackle. it seems that versatility is he could play guard for the first couple of years. If they need him to move to tackle, he could also do that. Where I think Skronsky, you're kind of plugging him in at guard, and that's what he is. And positional value is right guard, a 10th pick of the draft.
Yeah, I'm going to try to get a little bit more homework on this before the tomorrow night. But I think sometimes people get a little caught up on, okay, so he's a better right guard, he'll play right guard, but does that mean he could not play right tackle? Like, would he be a terrible right tackle? No one's told me he just will never survive at right tackle. They've just told me he projects to be his best player at right guard. But I think the Eagles could be fine with that and saying, hey, if Lane Johnson gets hurt, I got to slide this guy to right tackle. I can win games.
Mm-hmm.
I won games with Jack Driscoll at right tackle. I can definitely win games with Peter Skronsky at right tackle and then somebody else at guard, maybe even Jack Driscoll or Cam Jurgens, depending on what his situation is. So I wouldn't want to rule a guy out because I wouldn't want to assume he can't play right tackle just because he's better at right guard. And again, you have to have that discussion of, well, Paris Johnson can play both, but can he play either position as high of a level as Peter Skronsky can play his position? That's the question, yeah.
All right, Mosher, you'll be off the rest of the week. Andrew DeCicco, by the way, is going to be joining us live tomorrow for the full show at Maynard's in Margate, so we'll have him for all 4 hours tomorrow. Your pick, are you agreeing that Skronsky's the pick, or do you have your own individual pick?
Oh, I mean, I can't agree. You mean without knowing who's going to be there? In that mock draft, I was agreeing with the pick, but who knows how the scenario is going to wind up unfolding.
So you don't have a prediction. You're not giving me like, hey, this is who I think what's going to happen.
I mean, there's so many variables, Mike. At the end of the day, I think most likely if they can move down, then move down if they can.
All right.
So
you think ultimately they'd like to get out of that 10 spot, add more picks?
Wouldn't that make sense?
Yeah. Oh, I think so. I think if you could say the best possible scenario for tomorrow night would be somebody calling them at number 10 and saying, we want that spot and we'll give you more picks, and then moving back and still getting a player that they like, yeah, that to me is the best case scenario.
I would call that the best possible scenario outside of them maybe being able to move up just a spot or two to get like Van Ness.
Okay.
I'm a big Van Ness guy. I think he's going to be a good player.
Yeah. I think if Jalen Carter slips to 7, I think that's the line of demarcation. If he's at 7, Howie makes the move.
All right. You're on record. I'll hold you to it.
Well, Jody Mack this morning asked me at what time do I think they're going to pick. I told him 9:42.
Is that a prop bet question? I don't understand.
I guess so. Well, I guess it's 10 minutes a pick. I guess that's like, hey, if they trade up, he said, well, they pick before 10 o'clock. And I said, nope, I'll go 9:42. You trade up, that'll get you right around the 7th or 8th pick.
Wonderful. Yeah. Sounds great.
Geoff Mosher. Inside the Birds, the podcast drops tomorrow morning at 6. Check that out. You guys are going live tomorrow night from 6 to 7, correct?
6 to 7:30. Myself, Adam Kaplan, and Greg Cosell.
All right. Well, that's on the YouTube channel and all the social media platforms. At Geoff P. Mosher. Thanks, Peter.
You got it, brother.
Paul.
Mary. All 3. Yeah, Paul.
See ya.
Take care.
All right, Moshe. Appreciate it as always. Geoff Mosher on the Sports Bash Live, 97.3 ESPN, the 97.3 ESPN free mobile app.